Welcome back to HFO Multifamily Market Watch, your trusted source for information for apartment owners and investors. Multifamily Market Watch is presented by Pacific Exteriors Northwest, a contractor specializing in siding and exterior envelopes and delivering exceptional quality and service for over 30 years. And by Gantry Incorporated, the nation's largest independent mortgage banking firm.
Welcome back to HFO Multifamily Market Watch. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate. Today we have back with us, he's the board of director of the Government Affairs Committee for Multifamily Northwest. He's also one of the founding lawyers of Andor Law. It's Marcel Gesmundo. Thank you, Marcel. I know it's been busy. Session's almost over. We're mid-June. We got about 2 more weeks. Thanks for all the hard work you've put in. I know it's been quite the battle.
Well, thanks for having me on the show. We are in the home stretch of the session. And so we kind of have a good lay of the land here in Oregon, at least, and as far as what's passed and kind of the last few bills that are likely to come through, I don't see a whole lot of surprises for us in the home stretch.
Oh, great. Well, I know we've been sending out a lot to our audience about kind of what was, there's a lot of stuff proposed, as we talked about it before the session even started with, so many new legislators in Salem. There's going to be a lot of stuff thrown against the wall. Can you maybe give a rundown of, as where we are today, maybe some of the wins for Multifamily Northwest from a legislative standpoint?
Yeah, I kind of put together a list of things that I thought were, smart policy decisions that the legislator made that I think are good for the industry, but also I think it's generally good policy for all Oregonians, is that we need a lot of housing, and so these will tend to at least promote or at least not hinder more housing production. So we had a housing production accelerator, which is hopefully going to streamline some of the housing development through kind of some code revision. So I think that could hopefully help, and it directs one of the state agencies to study housing issues. Of course, you don't want to study something to death, but at least they're kind of looking at it and kind of focusing on what we can do to build more housing.
So looking at some solutions instead of just identifying what the problems are.
And at the end of the day, there was a lot of bills that were proposed that I think would have had a pretty negative impact on the housing industry, and I think would have been a disincentive to invest in the state. And ultimately, the legislator decided not to proceed with those ideas, which I think was a good policy call, especially in this climate. So, for example, there was a bill that was proposing to essentially put mandatory air conditioning in all units, at least units of 10 units or more. That proposal in the Senate didn't move forward. There were some creative ideas about ending no-cause notices for certain people depending on their status, like whether they're a student or a teacher. And kind of while we certainly understand the sentiment there, I think it's a little bit of a slippery slope when you start carving out protections for one group over another. That idea ended up not proceeding. There was another bill, I heard your last guest talking about software bans.
Right.
That was a bill that didn't end up proceeding in the Senate. That was 722.
Though it may still come in this, there's still maybe something in the city of Portland.
Portland is, yeah. I worked a little bit on that with Multifamily Northwest as well. They decided to table that idea and at least spend a bit more time. So for the city, that is alive in the city of Portland. But at the state level, they kind of at least have abandoned that this session. That bill was also coupled with a pretty big other proposal, which was to reduce the rent control exemption for new construction down from 15 years to 7 years. That would have had a really big discouraging effect, I think, on investment in the state.
And that, again, both of those were kind of out there. Did you find that they were more receptive to listening to, owners and Multifamily Northwest in terms of some of the nuances of the management side? And, when they pass some of this legislation, it takes a little bit while to see the unintended consequences. But this time, it felt like I want to call it success because that doesn't really sound right, but that there was more of a collaborative environment than what we've seen in the past in Salem.
Yeah, I think that compared to kind of prior years, at least working with Multifamily Northwest and their lobbying team, a lot of legislators were much more open to kind of hearing the industry side and their perspective on these different proposals and what would work and what wouldn't. I certainly think, kind of to Multifamily Northwest's credit, they had a great hire in Zach Lindell as the Director of Government Affairs, and his work with Jonathan Clay has been really effective kind of in lobbying and helping to kind of ensure that we have good relationships and we kind of effectively communicate our concerns. And to their credit, the legislators have listened. And we don't always agree, but at least have the conversation. And so a lot more doors have been open, and that's been refreshing.
And now, like you said, we're about wrapping up. And looking at it, what were some of the ones that, again, there was the deal about application fees, there was the AC bills, things like that. I mean, is there any else that's maybe coming up for a vote, or are you pretty comfortable where we sit today?
I feel good about where we sit today. The last major bill I think of concern was essentially limiting what you could charge for screening down to, it was $10 was the proposal. It was originally, there was one bill that proposed that you couldn't charge at all for screening. Then another bill said $10, and there was even some discussion about maybe $20. Ultimately, that bill didn't proceed. And I think, in large part, I think Multifamily Northwest did a great job of explaining to the legislators what that impact would be. And I mean, I think in some ways too, that bill was proposed based on some anecdotes.
Right.
Essentially, like there was a few people here and there who may have been entitled to a refund that didn't get one, but there was no real data on it. And in fact, the association, I think through help also from HFO and some of the screening companies, showed with real data just how many people are actually impacted by that. And it was, fractional. It was a small fraction, really not appreciable. And so it's hard to set good policy when you're just setting policy from an anecdote or a story here and there.
Right.
And you're having a huge impact on everybody else. And so that was a great instance where I think that they, again, kind of reason prevailed at the end of the day.
Which seems like I kind of alluded to last question was it seems they were more responsive to that than it seems that we used to have very, some legislation put in place. It was all kind of anecdotal based and not really on any data. I guess you could say we should have been better about providing some of the data, but now it feels like they're now at least looking at the data and, we're getting into the room and at least having a fruitful conversation with people that are, in power to make these decisions.
I think it's a great question. And the way I think about setting policy based on anecdote versus hard numbers and data and reliable data is I still think that there's a tendency, but maybe a little bit less so, to at least propose some legislation and ideas based on anecdote.
Right.
But I think that a lot of the legislators are much more interested if you can come up with data that shows that perhaps that's a bad idea. And so where I'd like to see things go eventually, though, is that whoever's pushing for a change in policy should have the data to support their idea. And so you shouldn't necessarily have to have the data to defeat it. It's like if you're the one who's saying, hey, we need a major change here that's going to change the law for everybody, I think that they should come to the table with data that seriously supports that. And so I hope that eventually that's where we get.
And some collaboration, and I think some collaboration if they don't have the data asked for it. And I think a recognition of if we put policy in, who are the ones that are going to have to, like I say, work under that policy and what does it do to them? And I do feel like there's been a little bit of a change. And I think maybe it's the timing, and it also probably has to do with this governor's mandate to try to get more housing. Now they're starting to ask housing providers, which then, makes them ask, Multifamily Northwest, developers, people that operate, why are we not having more housing? And we can open it up and say, it's SCC charges, it's this, but it's also the cost to operate in the state. And therefore, if we don't address some of these issues. So I think that's kind of helped maybe make them more receptive to listening to, some other voices than what they were heard in the past.
And I would agree. I think to their credit, I think most of the legislators are laser focused on production.
Right.
And so if something is not furthering that goal, it doesn't get as much airtime and it doesn't get as much consideration. And so I do think that between having that goal and being focused on it, and then also, listening to the people who provide housing in the state and to say, hey, this is going to will it make it harder or easier to do that for us? And if the answer is it makes it harder, then I think the legislators have been more hesitant to kind of create a new policy that makes it harder.
I know you being the chair of the government committee, how do you straddle the, big owner versus like what people describe as a mom and pop in terms of operational things and legislation that maybe feels like it affects more one than the other, but trying to get those groups working together? What's kind of been your way to try to do that? Because again, you're in your law firm, you represent, all kinds. So in terms of size of owners, I mean, how do you kind of grapple with that?
Generally, the strategy has been, at least for multifamily, has been collaboration as much
Right.
as possible and proactive collaboration. And so to the extent that we've been able to, it's been in kind of reaching out to our partner and kind of sister associations who also are dedicated to housing providers. Sometimes they're dedicated to smaller housing providers. Sometimes, it might be the mobile home association. But a lot of these issues we have in common. And so ideally, we will support each other in what is best for housing overall, and in both in terms of generating new housing and attracting investment in the state. But also at the same time, I think for some of the smaller providers, it's all to ensure that they don't flee the market, which
Right.
we've seen
We've
some
seen
of
that.
that as well.
Yeah, big time. And then a question I had, now that we have, in Salem, the state legislature, beginning to wrap up, does that mean then Multifamily Northwest can put some energy into maybe some of the city stuff? I mean, which again, Portland kind of dominates that, or is again really? I think we made a concerted effort this time to really focus on the state to try to get some normalcy. I mean, what's your take on that?
Yeah, now that the session's wrapping up, we know what we're going to get as far as some of the policy changes for the state, and we'll certainly keep a focus on any kind of local initiatives. But it will be much more than just Portland. We're going to keep our eye out on all parts of the state. We've seen kind of a lot of policy changes in Eugene, which is also a huge market, and so absolutely focused on supporting housing providers in Eugene. And similarly, in any local jurisdiction. And so it's hard to keep your eyes on every city and every town.
No, that's true.
So if people are in those areas and they see something coming, we hope that kind of they'll say something and say, hey, do you know about this? Can you chime in? Because generally the association is very proactive if a member says, we need some help, in our city or town with a proposed policy.
But I mean, again, like you said, if members are there, locally, or local owners are there and they hear something going, the sooner, we can get wind of that and, try to get a plan together, the better. So as we say to owners, keep the association informed. If you hear something, even if it's just a conversation with a couple of people, one of your representatives, and they bring something up. I mean, more information is the better, that we can try to, as you said, give data, give some hard numbers, give an idea of this is how it's going to affect, as opposed to, trying to react when it's already on the floor or something like that.
Well, could I just say something about the owners? Because I think a large part of your following does deal kind of with ownership. I work with management primarily. But I can say kind of on the lobbying front, it would be great to see more owners and ownership involved in some of this. And I know that sometimes that's tough because you have a lot of ownership interests, or they're split interests. But to the extent we could get more owners involved, that would be fantastic if any of the viewers were interested in that.
And again, if they can reach out to us, I'll give them your contact to the association. That's something we've been pushing for. And it's funny, I was just talking to the legislative head of government affairs for the Washington Association, and I said it was interesting when we had to fight, the rent cap bill in 16, 17. It was funny that, I hate to say it, I guess the one consequence from our industry is it did spark some more ownership involvement. I think prior to that, there was a lot of, we'll just let other people, handle it. And then seeing that, I was relaying to her, Carter, that, maybe that'll be a chance to get more member involvement now that you've had this go in Washington. And then it's just, in Oregon, the key is just kind of keeping the momentum going and getting more owners involved, earlier in going down to Salem, talking to their legislators, explaining the situation. Because again, if we have the same voices all the time talking about it, I think it starts kind of losing. You need different voices explaining it. So, in looking into 26, are the things that you hope from going kind of back, putting your attorney hat on? Are there things that need to get cleaned up that are still causing some consternation on how people operate? I mean, what are you looking at in 26 as this session wraps up that we would like to get addressed, or you would like to see?
Well, 26 will be a short session, and so it's a little different on the lobbying side for a short session, in that each legislator only gets one bill.
Right.
And so it's much more difficult to get something through, and so that means usually you have to kind of work with other groups, or even across the aisle, work collaboratively with some tenant associations if possible, because you have less openings and opportunities to pass something. The association is currently kind of working with all its members to take ideas.
Okay.
What are their highest priorities? So people have ideas right now, or things that are irking them or causing them kind of heartache or kind of financial distress. Those would be things that would be top of list, and you should send those to the government affairs. Though apart from that, though, I think One goal of mine would be as an attorney and someone who helps run a law firm and where we see a lot of the costs generated for our clients, if we could just simplify things in the process, I think that owners and managers could save a lot of money on the legal expenses. I mean, there's more than enough work. We don't need the work. So if we could essentially keep things a little bit more streamlined, we could save people quite a bit of money overall. So that would be one of my goals, is to kind of streamline some of the processes, especially around essentially just the basics of collecting rent.
Right. So a little bit easier, well, like you said, normalize them or get them more, can sync to where it's a little bit easier and not so many issues going through them, which again, it keeps you busy from the legal standpoint. But again, that's not the end game. You're more than busy. It's, can we make it a little bit easier on owners and housing providers to make the system a little bit smoother in the tenant side too?
Yeah, and fair too. I mean, that's the pieces. At the end of the day, it needs to be fair for everyone.
Well, I will say, I think the work that you've done has been admirable, and it does feel like there's been a change. I don't want to say it's a 180 change of where we were in the last 4 or 5 years, but it is. I mean, you're getting in the door, they're listening to you, and I think what you brought up was really important for our audience. Is we do need more owners involved, and even if it's writing a letter, a phone call, or just something to again, if we wait too long, it's really hard to get in front of these things if we're always so reactionary.
Well, on that, I will say it's not as hard as people think, and and the best time to do it is actually between the sessions.
Right.
So, let the legislators have a month or two of summer off, but in September, October, if you live in those districts or you have properties in those districts, they love to hear from members or constituents. And so that's the best time to reach out to them with kind of any ideas. And they will generally talk to you. They're quite friendly, all the legislators. And
I'll say, you and I've talked about this. And for owners, if you want talking points or things like that, happy to provide them. We can provide them. Multifamily Northwest. I mean, there's stuff out there that make it really easy. Put your own spin on it and your own words. But again, like you brought up, I think getting those line of communications open now, once summer's over, is the time to do that. Then we can really make some hay in 26 and 27. Well, thanks, Marcel, for doing this. I know you're busy. We get, just kind of wrapping up and take a deep breath, but I'm sure we'll be doing this again soon. And enjoy the last couple of weeks of session, but really enjoy the summer. And like I said, it feels better than it did the last couple of years. I commend you for all the work that you've done with the association and with the law firm. It's been really great for our industry.
Thanks, Greg. And you've done quite a bit of work yourself, so thank you for all your work on it too.
All right. We'll see you. We'll see you next time on HFO Multifamily Market Watch. Thank you.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information. HFO is a member of Global Real Estate Advisors. Learn more at grea.com.